Now we're going to go into book talk. Again, I don't consider it spoiler. If you don't want to know about things in the book and how they compare to the show, in case you might read the book later, feel free to hop out. And so, Catfish, I thought the one thing I would do, since so many of my spoiler book talk sections are kind of comparing and contrasting, and I just happen to love the book so much that I say, well, gee, I just happen to like it better the way the book did it. I thought I should start off by talking about changes that the show made that I think, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. It's good.
Well, finally, some props.
Right. Well, one thing I always talk about is how I call it a novel, but this really was a collection of short stories put together into a book form. And because of that, sometimes you get to a chapter and you're like, wait, where is this coming from? And so I'm going to give you a specific example. You know, if you've watched the show, that down in Mechanical, there's this character named Shirley. I joked that in episode 3, she gave the speech about, okay, to fix the generator, we got to do A, B, C, and D. That was Shirley. She got into bed with Juliette. So you met that character and you understand, okay, she's from Mechanical. She's a friend of Juliette's. She works on the generator with Juliette. Like the show set that up. But if you read the Wool collection, the first collection of these short stories titled Wool, the book Wool, you get to page 330, and suddenly there's this character, Shirley, who has not been mentioned on any of the 330 previous pages. And Shirley is kind of in a dramatic situation, is all I'll say. And you're like, Shirley's in this dramatic situation because she really cares about Juliette, and she's a good friend of Juliette's. And if you're reading the book, you might think, well, who the hell are you? You're telling me you're a huge friend of Juliette and you really care about Juliette. I've been reading about Juliette for hundreds of pages, and your name's never come up. When you make a show, you're like, oh, okay, let's introduce these characters early if I need them to do something later, where because, once again, it was just a short story, and in the earlier short stories, the author, Hugh Howey, may not have had a need for a character who worked in Mechanical, who was a good close friend of Juliette's. We never heard of Shirley, and suddenly she shows up and she's like, you know, once again, in this dramatic situation, I guess is the way I'll describe it. And she's like in this dramatic situation because she cares about Juliette, and like Juliette's her friend. And you read it the first time through and you might go, who? Who are you? I'm supposed to care about, oh, you're a good friend?
I mean, spoiler
Juliette's
alert,
never
Bubba.
mentioned.
Spoiler alert for Juliette still being alive on page 330.
Oh, I didn't say that.
You made me sad. Oh, okay.
I did not say.
That'd be good.
Listen to my sentence there. I said Shirley is in a dramatic situation because she cared about Juliette and said Juliette was her friend. I never said Juliette was alive. I guess I've spoiled that Shirley is alive on page 330. But Shirley's still alive at this point in the show. So, you know, there you go. And then similarly, I want to jump and talk about George. And this is something I talked about last week in the book talk, but maybe you guys didn't listen. Well, I didn't stress enough that the beginning part of book talk last week wasn't going to be really a spoiler. George is, as I've said now a good handful of times, George's name maybe appears, maybe if you're lucky, 10 times in this book called Wool. And the thing is that George was a character who was more from Juliette's past. In the book, and I believe on the show too, Juliette is supposed to be 34 years old. Juliette, in the show, it's like, okay, well, she was, you know, she just had a relationship with George and he just passed and he's on her mind and it's kind of a constant thing. Where in the book, it plays, you know, all these things kind of feel of a piece. The reason why George doesn't come up much is because he's not from the immediate past. He's from Juliette's past. And yes, she thinks about him, but it's not much. You know, she is over George. And so I think you kind of convinced me last week on the book talk that by making George a more recent thing as it plays on the show, you know, it gives her maybe a more recent motivating factor. Right. Where in the book, she was over George and didn't really use George as a motivation for anything, really.
In the book, George was alone.
And now just a couple other things into book talk before I go to some feedback on book talk, Catfish. And that is that if you're a listener and you are listening to this and you haven't read the book, we hear from people who are like, well, should I read the book or should I not read the book or what should I do? And so the way I'm trying to wrap my head around it is imagine that the book and the show are telling the exact same story, but they're telling it in different genres. And so the show is this mystery box like Lost. I watched the show Lost. Hopefully, listeners, you understand and remember that show Lost. Lost was a fun show to watch because it was always like, what's going on? Is that a clue for something? You would come up with these theories and off the wall things would happen. And it was real fun trying to solve the mystery of everything that was happening on this show Lost. And that seems to be what the Silo showrunners are doing. Hey, let's throw up all these mysteries. We'll maybe give you some clues. Can you figure out what's happening, what's going on? And so I can understand the fun of that. And so if you're somebody who really loves all these mysteries and coming up with theories about, ooh, will this happen? If you really love that about the show and love that type of things, and you read the book expecting, ooh, I want a puzzle box mystery of theories and things, you're going to be really disappointed. Because guess what, listeners? This book is not a puzzle box mystery at all. This book is a fast-paced thriller. It's not a slow burn mystery box puzzle. It's a fast-paced thriller. Yes, it's set in this, what you would call sci-fi dystopian world. But as Catfish has kind of clued you in on, there are a lot of reveals and answers very early in this book. You don't really have time to come up with, ooh, I have a theory about this and I have a theory about that. Because very quickly it tells you what's going on. Like when the mayor died, you kind of realized who the killer was and why they had done it and how they had killed her. And so if you are frustrated by the show kind of being a slow burn puzzle box show, there's a good chance you probably will like the book better. But if you love that slow burn mystery box part of the show, don't go reading this novel thinking you're going to get that same kind of thrills you get from it, because that's just not what this book is. And so I've said that kind of on a lot of our book talk sections before, but I've kind of come to the point where I think it's okay to tell listeners, hey, if you read the book expecting it to be more like the show in tone, it's not going to be like the show in tone. And this episode 100% did not happen in the book. And now I'll go into kind of the final thing we'll talk about this before listeners, we get to your feedback. And that is Deputy Marnes' death. So obviously Deputy Marnes dies on the show. He dies in the book. As I've said before, the book is from a limited third-person perspective. We follow one person, one character, and we get their perspective. So the first bit of the book, which is once again short stories, the first short story is from Holston's limited perspective. That's what we hear. The second part of the book is from Mayor John's limited perspective, so we follow her. The third part of the book is a short story from Juliette's perspective. Juliette, what she sees is she's come up top, she's become sheriff, and Marnes, who she could tell, everybody could tell, really had a crush on the mayor, is not doing well. And then suddenly, triggering alert, everybody, Marnes has hung himself, she believes. It's not like a murder mystery to solve. It's presented as Marnes hung himself. And so she understands it. There's not a murder mystery to dive into. There's no chase for somebody called Doug Trumbull, who's not a character in the book. There's not kind of anything. It's not a thrilling part. So the show, instead of making the villains make it look like Marnes committed suicide and everybody just moves on, the show wants to have some actions, wants to have some twists. And so they develop this whole plot, which is not in the book at all. Now, in some ways, I love it in the book that it showed, okay, the villains are smart. They can kill somebody and not let anybody know that they killed Marnes. You know, they're kind of smart. They're cunning villains. They're villains you got to be crafty around. But of course, that doesn't allow you to have a chase of suspects. So, you know, it's just kind of which do you prefer? Catfish, I've gone on for a bit, rambled for a bit. Any thoughts on any of these parts that I just talked about in the show and the book?
Well, I mean, just based on the only rant I've had about this show so far is that you think Judicial would be a little bit smarter about these things and not think, this is great.
Well, right. Judicial, that there's no scene like that in the book because it's not a, oh, great, now the murderer has been caught. Instead, it's, okay, the autopsy and the evil people convince everybody, okay, the mayor died from having too much trouble walking up all these flights of stairs at her age. Marnes killed himself because he was distraught over the mayor's death. So the villains do a good job covering their tracks. And Juliette's so new in the position, she doesn't really have a place to question that so much. In some ways, I think that I liked it a lot because, once again, it shows that these villains are crafty and cunning, and you got to be careful around them, and they are smart. Where here, you're right, in the show, there's parts of this that just didn't make too much sense.
Right, but on the other hand, you know, you love things that are mysteries.
Well, I love things that are mysteries that were set up to be mysteries. What's weird is, I keep trying to say is, it's like at times they're trying to create mysteries from the book's narrative, from the story's narrative. And sometimes I think it doesn't work as successfully. So that's where I've gone.
Right.
Let's get to some of your feedback, listeners. And once again, we love your feedback. We mention all the ways. If you don't want to spoil anything online, you can do hello@doublepmedia.com. YouTube user with Desiree Brown wrote, I agree with the guy on the right. That's me, Catfish.
Oh, no, that was me. I was on the right.
Oh, okay. Build a Million Bridges asked this question. They said, help me out. Why do you think the view screen glitched in the cafeteria, showing the world as green and lush for a split second when the generator switched to the backup? And what other reveals do you think could happen in the show that aren't in the book? So that's another thing. There's no sort of glitch on the cafeteria screens. In the book, there's no glitch on the cafeteria screens showing something other than a desolate, terrible world like there was on the show. Build to Millions, you're asking me what could be on this, what's a reveal that the show could do that's not in the book? Yeah, sorry, the camcorder is not in the book. Walker's trying to solve it. I would say that if I were trying to do this, and what could I put on the camcorder that Walker could see that would be shocking? Well, there's a character in the second book named Donald Keene, who's not a part of this first book at all. I don't think they'll be in the first season, but I was like, well, if you're going to have something on the camcorder, maybe have that Build a Million Bridges, and hopefully that's not spoilery that they're characters in later books who aren't in the first book.
You know, I think for the show, Bubba, the view screen glitching is just to still tease us the idea that what's really going on outside.
Right. It's more for the TV viewing audience, not the characters in the silo, because they haven't mentioned it since then.
Right. Right.
Okay. And then ID Forever wrote, I agree with you, Bubba, that these mystery box issues can be fairly anticlimactic because they, as you mentioned, they weren't intended to really be mysteries in the novel. I hope the camcorder can be used to fix the mystery about the outside. I also agree with Catfish's point about so far Bernard is more polite than Juliette. She's kind of mean here, where in the book she seems very likable. The pacing might be a bit right. Great podcast. Thank you, ID4 Forever.
Yeah. I love it. And by the way, I think it's 1D Forever.
1D Forever, right? Oh, good point.
Oh boy,
adding terms.
You blew it.
Hey, listeners, hopefully you agree that this hasn't been spoiler about things that are coming up. If you want us in these spoiler sections, and again, we do talk spoilers, but we don't get too specific in these spoiler sections. If you want us to be more specific and send away anybody who hasn't read the books and really go spoiler, just write in the comments on YouTube, tweet at us, let us know. We'll be happy to do it. For everybody here at Double PHQ Forever, my name is Bubba. You can find me on Twitter at FitandTrim. That's FITTENTRIM at FitandTrim on Twitter.
And I'm Catfish. You can hit me up at CJGman67 on Twitter. Your 67th favorite CJG man. And we will talk to you next week on The Cleaning.